A number of the first ladies have been writers, starting with Louisa Adams, who wrote Adventures of a Nobody, her, her autobiography. And then often we think about Eleanor Roosevelt and the 27 different books that she wrote and the newspaper column that she wrote, My Day, Every Day. Um, and then there are first ladies who were interested in literacy. And Barbara Bush, I think it was so important the way that she championed literacy. And the portrait that we have hanging of her in the exhibition, which is on loan from the White House, in the frame, in the four corners of the frame, are little books. And it was such a nice touch when we spotted that. I was like, oh my gosh, this really emphasizes her interest in literacy.
Yes, absolutely. And you think about first ladies in our history and their love of reading and literature and books. And Abigail Fillmore, of course, the first lady to establish an actual research library for the White House. On the ground floor, the White House is the little White House library,
And that
and
was
we
her.
really have her
Did
to
it come
thank.
out of her inheritance
It
from
did.
her father? That was like really the only thing that was left to her were her
That's
father's books.
that's exactly right. Her father had been a minister, had left her his collection of books, and that's her, her first little library, and that was one of her impacts on the White House, is establishing the White House Library. And then, of course, Eleanor Roosevelt, as you had mentioned, what a master communicator. Not only her daily column, My Day, but her weekly Sunday radio broadcasts. In fact, she was among the first voice that Americans heard on December 7th, 1941, after Pearl Harbor had been attacked. Of course, the president had issued a statement earlier in the day, a press release, but she, in her weekly Sunday, 6:30 p.m. Coffee hours with the American public, she talked about what had just happened to us and the strength and resolve we all needed to have, and that this was going to be a difficult effort, but we would get through it together. She also established the Office of Presidential Correspondence at the White House. She encouraged Americans to write to their president and to write to her. In fact, my first job in the White House in 1984 was in presidential correspondence, reading presidential mail, and I was trained by a woman who was hired in the last year of FDR's administration. She'd been reading mail all that time. That connection to Americans and writing to your president really was a lot directly linked to her and her advocacy. And then in later years, of course, you mentioned Barbara Bush. Barbara Bush established the Literacy Foundation, Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. It's now in its 30th year. That was legislation, actually the National Literacy Act that was passed in 1990 was legislation that President Bush's administration worked on with the Congress, but the champion, of course, was Barbara Bush. She really believed that families that read together, not only it created this bond for their family life, but that the people needed to be able to read and to write. And this is how the biggest problems in the world could be solved, if people could read, write, and comprehend. And so her legacy of that foundation that exists still to this day, very much focused on improving literacy throughout our nation, which is still at numbers that are unacceptable. But it's nice that you noticed that frame around her beautiful portrait that had those 4 books, because it's one of the subtle touches that directly connects Barbara Bush to what she will be always remembered for, is her love of literature and books and reading.
And also with Laura Bush. In the portrait of Laura Bush, she's seated very comfortably, and she has a book in her hands, open, as though we've walked into the room and interrupted her in the middle of a good read.
Yeah, it's a beautiful portrait, a very serene portrait of Laura Bush, which really conveys her personality. It's, calm and strong, and loved books, loved words, loved literature. And of course, as First Lady of Texas, she established the Texas Book Festival that is still going on. The National Book Festival that just had its 20th year. Literacy was her passion. She was a teacher. She was a librarian. She brought those interests to the White House. And the portrait that you have of her that was done in 2008, just as the Bushes were leaving the White House, is one of her favorite places in the White House, the West Sitting Hall, and the afternoon sun that comes through that beautiful Palladian window. And it's, in the private space, and it's where she loved to sit and to read. And when her late afternoons, when some of her official schedule was done, and before the president would come home, this was her quiet time, and where she would say later too in her memoirs that you know reading not only was her passion, but also something that she had learned from her mother. And when she would come home from school, she would see her mother sitting and reading a book. So it really conveyed the continuity of love of reading, love of literature throughout her life.